Need no stinking glasses. Yay. Wah. Wah. Alright, hopefully we got something going on here. And I don't know. Yay, there we go. There's that. Hopefully some folks will show up. Let me know if you can hear me. Okay. Hopefully somebody shows up here. We'll get started in about 3 or 4 minutes. Alright. Get that set up correctly. Yay, there's somebody here. So we're going to get started here in about 3 minutes, and if you've got any questions you want me to try to cover this evening, go ahead and type them into the box. Let me know who you are, where you're coming from, all that good stuff. And tonight, oh, there's lots of people. Hopefully y'all can hear me. One of these I need. There we go. There we go. Somebody give me a thumbs up or a howdy do that you can hear me. If not, I'm going to do something really fast before we get started. So I see we got a few people. We're going to start promptly at 6 o'clock if we're really lucky. Yay, lots of people showing up. Can you all hear me? Hopefully at least see my lips moving and you check in the chat. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Okay, good. Thank you, Kat. I was getting paranoid. That happened once before and it totally freaked me out. So if you got any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat and let us know who you are. And we're going to get started here in about 2 minutes. Tonight, besides me just randomly babbling, we're going to be talking about a jatropha plant, but more than anything, we're going to talk a lot about parasites, because that's all I see on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all that good stuff. Hey, Pickles. I did, yes. I did get your question. I was like, I think I did. All right, I got too much stuff in front of me here, so hopefully I can get organized. So, all right, we'll get started here in just a minute and say lots of cool herb stuff. If you're just showing up, let us know who you are, where you're from. Hey, Beth. And that even fits with the theme, because that's kind of Babesia is a type of a parasite, as well as thank you. And I've got to put down alpha-gal. Oops, helps if I know how to spell it right. And Lyme co-infections, all that good stuff. See that? I wasn't even going there. Oh, that means I got to talk about that. All right, cool. All right. We're almost ready to go. Let us know who you're from. If you got any questions for me, we will try to cover tonight. Needless to say, we could just talk about parasites, but at some point I'll get bored and want to do something else. Hey, Daniel-san. Oh, good. You say I'm going to say crazy Chinese words tonight. I got you, Tammy. I saw those. We are all set. All right. It is 6 o'clock, so if you don't know, I'm Bob Linde from the School of Herbal Studies and Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies here in, well, okay, it's not that sunny out right now, but in St. Petersburg, Florida. And I started doing this with COVID because I missed talking to everybody because we weren't allowed to have classes yet. And decided that I was getting out to a lot of folks who wouldn't normally get it, and kind of I like the kind of ADD eclectic process of just fielding questions as they come, so I don't get to prep a whole lot. So sometimes I got nothing to say, and sometimes I got tons to say. And somebody had suggested that instead of just randomly going off of what people have sent in, to try to create a little bit of a theme every month. So I'm trying that, and it lets me prepare a little bit, at least ahead of time. I have a few thoughts in my brain. But also, I don't want to stop the free form of people who come up with ideas or questions, whether they're personal or just general questions. Western, Chinese, tropical, I'm good with all of it, and promise if I have no clue, I will say I got no clue. And you'll find I talk a lot about energetics. So a lot of times I'm going to kind of go like, well, sometimes, which I know is irritating, but it really does depend on the individual. I'm going to back that up a little bit. But I want to talk about some upcoming stuff and who we are, what we are. I promise I'll only do this one more time after I do a little station identification. You can find out more. We've got a multi-practitioner practice here. We've got herbalists and acupuncturists. All of our acupuncturists are great herbalists. We have some people who are all just do herbs and diet. And everybody here, I can say this now, has studied at least 2 years with me, most much longer than that. And as well as our 6 days a week that we've got great practitioners here, we also have an intern clinic 3 nights a week. So on Monday nights, we have acupuncture interns from Dragon Rises School in Sarasota, which is shout out to them. They've got I think a January class forming, so any of you who want to jump off the deep end and run away to acupuncture school, they are close by for the Tampa Bay area. On Tuesday night, we have our senior advanced Western herb students, and on Wednesday night, we have folks like Daniel there and Tammy that are the Chinese herb students. And all of our students are great. They're going to go through an in-depth intake, asking lots of questions. If you've got blood work, supplements, anything like that, we'll look at all that stuff, and they're going to ask you about your poop and your menses and your sleep and your what makes things better or worse. They're going to look at your tongue, take your pulse, and all of that helps to form a pattern of imbalance that lets us to better understand how we correct people. And we use an odd language of hot, cold, wet, dry, deficient, excess, tense, and lax. And whether we say that in Chinese with yin and yang and qi and blood stagnation, phlegm, or Western, it really doesn't matter. It really comes to the same conclusion. And besides having the student clinic, we have lots of classes, and we've got what do we got coming up? Not this coming weekend, so I'm going to be out at Shopapalooza for those of you who are local, although it's going to be chilly. Do dress warm, but it should turn out to be a nice day. We'll be out there Saturday and Sunday. Although Sunday, I will not be there for much of the day. I'm going to be at Sweetwater Farms in Tampa. I'm going to do an herb walk. I think there's one at 1 and one at 3. And so you do need to sign up for those. Those usually sell out. But we're going to look at the things that aren't planted in rows. We're going to see what weeds are growing up there. And I haven't been up there in a couple of months, so I'm going to get up there a little bit early, do a little scouting around, see what we've got. If you're not familiar with Sweetwater Organic Farm, it is a CSA, community-supported agricultural farm. I always give my proceeds to that back to the farm because I want them to keep running forever and ever so that our kids and their kids can all have access to really good, healthy vegetables and stuff that they grow there on the farm. If you've never been up there, it's a great opportunity. You can always just walk up there. They have a few vendors. They've usually got music. I'm not sure who the music is tomorrow on Sunday, but it's super appropriate to just walk in and check the place out. Other classes that are coming up, we have the Western Herbalism 101 series is starting back up again. So December 7th and 8th, not this weekend, but the weekend after. It's what every herbalist should know. It's like what your grandmother knows, but it's also the starting point if you want to go on animals. I got you, Spring. Well, it helps if I know how to spell animals. Geez, that's pretty bad. Cats. The 101 class is the start for all of our Western program. So if you're like, whether you're just like, oh, I think herbs are cool, I want to get a little bit more formal instruction, or I want to do the whole 2-year program, this is where you start with all of it. And we'll have a couple of start dates. So December 7th and 8th, January 18 and 19. I think there's one in February. So lots of cool stuff. We've also, that weekend of the December 7th and 8th, if you're in the local area and part of the American Herbalist Guild, we started a really fun tradition last year of AHG, American Herbalist Guild camping trip. So that's going to be in Little Manatee. So definitely sign up ahead of time. Space is limited. It's a little bit more relaxed than the school camping trip that we have. And I will be up there on that Sunday. Ruthie, I believe, is going to do an herb walk or something cool on Saturday, while I'm teaching for the 101 class, and then she teaches on Sunday, and I'll go up and do an herb walk in Little Manatee next weekend. And really reasonable price. If you like camping, it should be a wonderful thing there. Then we've got December 12th. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Is Herbal Make and Take Musculoskeletal System. I know I'm missing one in there. Oh well. Check the calendar if nothing else. There's also December 20th, the seasonal medicine making, so there'll be winter medicine. Our next open forum is December 27th. December camping trip. And the full moon market, I believe, is on the December 13th. So if you've not been here for the Blue Raven full moon market, we have another organization comes in and puts on an amazing drum circle. There's usually about 15-20 vendors. I'm sure with the holiday time being upon us, it'll be great. And really just a fun time, very mellow. It is very child friendly. Some people will come for an hour and just walk through the vendors, and some people will stay and drum. So it's really open to anybody in all their different venues for that. Also, please remember we've got gift certificates here, so it's a great way for folks that are interested in herbalism, your significant others, or people you want to bring into the fold. If you get a gift certificate, I think we've got for a $100 gift certificate, you get a second one for $15. Tinnitus. Okay. I got you, Ronnie. But people can use that for acupuncture treatment, herbal consults. They can use it for products, classes, and don't forget we've got a plant nursery out back. We're going to have a crap ton of plants out at Shopapalooza this weekend. But you're always welcome to check out the garden and see what kind of cool medicinal and edible plants we've got here. You can learn more about the clinic and all the services we offer at AcuHerbals, AcuHerbals.com, or you can learn about the school at traditionsherbschool.com. Wow, I think I said everything I need to on that. All right, parasites. Oi. So, what up, Sabrina? Man, everybody's already good and chatty. Let me make sure I didn't miss anybody. So, parasites, love them or hate them. I guess we don't ever love parasites. I guess the conversation of parasites is one that we either love or hate. As we see the expansion of Instagram and TikTok as a place to get our medical advice, and I don't recommend that, there is a huge... And I won't say it's even new, but I'm going to say it's probably more so than I've seen ever before. But the idea of doing parasite cleanses to the point where people are doing it almost endlessly. And without a doubt, certain communities, certain risk factors increase the likelihood of parasites. And when I see people doing weeks and weeks or months and months of parasite cleanses, I have to wonder, A, why they're doing it. Either they're exposed to a lot of parasites and need to figure out how to take some safety precautions. The technique that they're using is not effective, or they're buying into some propaganda to sell some products. And I'm going to say all of the, people do get parasites. And the reality is there's a lot of people pushing products out there. And there is a history of people in jungles, living on rivers with, hey, Dinah, that over the millennia have a very high risk because they're living off the land, they're living with farm animals and so forth, are very likely to have parasites. And so it's a very common practice to kind of deworm your pets, deworm your humans with very gentle herbs that grew locally. Or what we find, especially in the tropics, where I'm going to say there's a larger number of parasites in the tropic, subtropic regions, is the foods that we use. And we even find it as you go further north. A lot of our herbs that we would use in our normal day-to-day dietary practices had some antiparasitic properties. But I would say some of the craze that we have now goes back only about 150 years or so. And there is, you guys are coming up with fun ones here for me. Okay, so I hope I will talk faster about my parasite stuff. Man, y'all got some good ones. Psoriasis and ear infection. Man, I woke up at a stupid hour last night for no reason whatsoever. I was like, man, my brain is not processing well. All right, I got the ear and the psoriasis. So we actually can go back to Kellogg's, not the company, although it certainly has a relationship. The man who actually started the cereals and the grape nuts was this high fiber cereal that was created from his religious beliefs. And I believe he was a Seventh-day Adventist who basically, at that time, he was of the belief that we are born dirty, not just physically, but spiritually and emotionally, that from the moment of our birth that we are not healthy and need to be cleansed in a way. And so he saw this was the time that turducken was invented. Literally, there was this high alcohol, high meat diet that everybody was on. Vegetables was something only the poor people ate, and the rich overconsumed their meats, and the fattier the better. Kind of like now. And so he said that this was the first health spas that were created by Kellogg, where they gave you all of this really high fiber diets with enemas to basically purge the poop out of us. And it was partly parasites, it was also spiritual parasites, and everything they can do to both do vomiting and pooping became a normal part of that practice. And we see that carried through even today with some of our cleansing, the idea of enemas and stuff. A lot of that goes back to those more puritanical ideas that were there. And we have to also wonder, because people were certainly constipated, that's not healthy. They were eating the high greasy meat diet with a lack of exercise. Obesity for the rich was actually an issue there. And so it wasn't so much as they were full of parasites so much as they were just unhealthy. And so we saw a lot of digestive issues. We saw things like gout, all of which made people ill with a wide range of chronic diseases that were being explained by parasites even then. And so as we lost the reasoning behind that, the ideas of Kellogg, and obviously Kellogg is no longer a health cereal. There's a fun history if you ever want to go and read some of that stuff. He's a fascinating individual. His brother, who they basically were at odds and developed some conflict in there that now gives us the Frosted Flakes and crap that we sometimes consume. Okay, I don't eat those. Used to when I was a kid. Loved them. So enough of the historical stuff. And we do see in traditional cultures, Ayurvedic medicine does seasonal cleanses. They do a lot of pooping. They do vomiting therapies. They do the nasal wash, not specifically for parasites, but more as just a cleanse that was often done seasonally to look at those transitions in time. And we see that with a lot of traditional cultures as well, that you can certainly go specifically after parasites from the symptoms that materialize, but as a ceremonial recognition of seasonal shifts where our diet changes, our behavior, our religious ceremonies all happen at a particular time. It would be very normal to do some sort of cleansing or purging that would involve parasites as well. But I find that also a lot of what goes on in herbalism, especially like pop culture herbalism, not just in parasites, but in general, is people are using the learned Google AI and say, what herbs are good for parasites? And then they throw them all into a bucket and they drink them. And the healing crisis is not that. They've actually just poisoned themselves. Because for something to be a strong antiparasitic, it has to have some level of toxicity. We have to create an unwelcome environment for Usually we're talking about intestinal parasites, but there are certainly bloodborne parasites and other types of parasites as well. They can get in all kinds of interesting places. But usually when we look at those things, they're mostly designed for intestinal parasites. A few we see, and actually that's getting to one of the questions we had, Babesia, when we look at like tick-borne diseases, mosquito-borne diseases, those are oftentimes blood-borne parasites that are microscopic as opposed to little squirmy wormy things. And without a doubt, we have lots of good Western herbs that are useful for that, most of which most people know. One in particular I like to talk about, but I actually find the Chinese, and I'm biased, I admit, Chinese medicine does a much better, more specific job when they look at their antiparasitics, because they're looking at this herb is specific for this particular, and I will say, intestinal parasite. And they tend to look more towards like, here's the herb for malaria and so forth. Oh, I didn't pull that one. I did pull a couple of herbs that we can talk about quickly as we go through this, and some of it will be relevant to stuff. Although I clearly forgot two of the really good bloodborne parasite ones. And I didn't mention skin-borne parasites as well. So we get parasites in crevices and so forth. I think one of the things when a lot of people in that pop herbalism realm, when they're talking about parasites, they don't define the type of parasite, and I think the definition of a parasite becomes very broad. So usually when we're talking about a parasite, it is something that's, it's something that is like a worm or a paramecium or an amoeba or some other kind of thing. But usually we're talking about some sort of squirmy wormy thing. And I believe that when people talk about it, they tend to expand that view, and they don't know that they're doing that, but they start talking about things like gut imbalances. When we talk about the good bacteria in our belly, there's all these different bacteria, yeast, fungus that have to be in such a specific ratio in our body for us to be healthy. And should we overconsume certain foods, in particular refined carbohydrates and sugars, it creates an imbalance into the gut that needs to be corrected. And so, we hear the term candidiasis that's used to explain pretty much every rash and unhappy belly, and that is a possible thing. But any kind of gut imbalance is not that we need to get rid of it. We need those good bacteria. We need all of even the bad stuff. We need in there in just the right balance. So we don't want to kill those per se, but we might need to correct them. And I don't think people think about that a lot of times when they're talking about parasites. But if you look at the list of symptoms that are oftentimes portrayed as like, if you have any of these symptoms, you have to have parasites, it's basically every symptom you might possibly have. Everything from a weakened immune system, colds and flu, which is a potential problem, to every skin rash, to everything. And I would say that's a bit of a cop-out and potentially misses other possible reasons for a particular issue. And so I think it's really important that we don't immediately leap on the diagnosis of, and I'll back that up here in a second, that word, the concept of every disease, every symptom is caused by parasites. We're going to miss cancer unless you're defining cancer as a parasite, although I know some practitioners, actually licensed practitioners in this area, think that all cancers are parasitic. And I would go, that's short-sighted and probably foolish. And that there are many causes of cancer, everything from genetics to trauma to stress to diet. And parasites, without a doubt, can do that in the same way viruses can be a cause for it. So recognizing that there is not a single answer for any of these. And there's ways to check for parasites, or we need to define the type of parasite so that we can choose the right herbs to combat a particular parasite. There's also something that I run into about once a year that nobody likes for me to talk about it, but it is a thing, that there's an emotional disorder that is, and I hate the name of it, they got to come up with a better name, delusional parasititis. And basically, these are people under a great deal of stress, usually there's some sort of sexual abuse in their history that they may not even be aware of, that they literally see parasites under their skin, coming out of their eyes, they're coughing them up, but when they're asked to bring them in, there's nothing there. Or when we send them to a gastroenterologist or a parasitologist, there's nothing to be found. And so it is unfortunate that, I know if I'm seeing it once a year, I know all the practitioners here have probably seen it about once a year. It's not that rare. And so that's different from somebody who's just like reading the internet too much and buys into it. This is somebody who's literally in this extreme emotional state that they're freaked out and they're sometimes tearing at their skin, pulling their hair out literally. That can be a serious issue. And although herbs can play a role in that, but it's more about dealing with the emotional aspect, those people need to be referred to counselors. And so making sure that we differentiate between the two. And I'm going to put one caution, because I know a lot of the people on here are herbalists. Parasites is a medical diagnosis, and so if you as an unlicensed practitioner, where you're not allowed to diagnose and treat a medical condition because that's practicing medicine without a license, if you tell somebody they have parasites and you take money from them either for the herbs or for the consult, you honestly just broke the law. So it's really important that we can give them whatever herbs we think are appropriate based on the imbalances that we see, but if somebody doesn't come to you with a diagnosis of parasites, and we put that languaging on them, you've actually broken the law and can get in big trouble. I only know of one case here in Florida, but somebody was pursued for that. They did a lot of other stupid things to back that up, like dressing like a doctor, having somebody disrobe, doing a physical exam, diagnosing them with parasites and selling them a parasite cleanse. The undercover cops came in after a couple of, basically everybody they saw were diagnosed with that. They were pretending to be doctors, not pretending, they were portraying themselves as doctors. And that's one of the big no-nos in any realm, but in particularly herbalism. There's nothing wrong with practicing herbalism. I strongly encourage it as long as people get some level of training from somebody. It doesn't have to be me. But making medical diagnoses, especially with little to no formal training or clinical practice, I think is foolhardy at the very least, and dangerous oftentimes, and ultimately illegal. So, what shall we talk about? Oh, let's talk about the medically stuff. For intestinal parasites specifically, the gold standard, if you will, I hate that term, but is a poop test. So where literally, I hate to say it, you get usually a gastroenterologist, sometimes you'll get a infectious diseases or tropical medicine specialist or a functional medicine doc. I think the first time I got a poop test, it was with a functional medicine doc. And somehow or another, you need to manage to get a couple of scoops of your poop into a tube. I find the easiest way is a trash bag in the bottom of a 5-gallon bucket. Some people will put a loose toilet seat on it. Some just sit on the bucket. Either one works great. And then it's not fun, but put on some gloves ideally. They usually give you a little scoopy thing, and you scoop that into it and wash your hands. Then you can tie up the bag and dispose of that appropriately. And it's not a good time. Most people sit there for a month before they finally go, fine, I'll go poop in a bucket. But that's a nice, convenient way to do it. There are other ways to test for it. You could actually do a blood test specific for a number of bloodborne diseases. So that's a blood smear. So they'll do a blood draw for that. And that's when we're looking at our bloodborne disorders like malaria, like babesia, and those are done through a lab. And so that blood smear is specific to going into like Quest or one of the other medical tests to get that done. That's different from the dark field microscopy. So everybody has parasites, as far as I know, with dark field microscopy. So I don't accept that as a accurate way to define parasites. Nothing wrong with it. but it is not accepted medical diagnostic tool unless something's changed in the last 6 months. The other thing that can hint at it is in just a really, so when we look at our basic blood work that we get ideally every year, and you get a CBC, a complete blood count, and a CMP. And this is one of the times when it's so important to be your own advocate with the doctor, because they don't put a lot of thought into it. They just check some boxes because they know that that's what they're supposed to do. And there's 2 different types of CBC. There's just the CBC where they check red blood cells and white blood cells and a few other things, and that's fine. But they need to do a CBC, a complete blood count, with differential in order to test for the eosinophils and a number of them, neutrophils, eosinophils, a whole bunch of other subcategories of your immune system, your different types of white blood cells. And so the eosinophils, when they're actually high out of range, can be indicative of a parasite. And so it's your immune system activating against this foreign invader. It doesn't tell you what type of parasite, intestinal or blood, but it's usually intestinal. And there's other things that it could be, but it's a good starting point that we get this annual blood test that kind of gives me like, oh, I've got, if you have weird gastrointestinal symptoms and you have a high eosinophils and no other obvious issues, then like, oh, maybe we should go get a poop test. And, again, you'd have to advocate to your doctor, like, I eat a lot of plants out of the dirt and I don't cook them or wash them. So, So the O and P is the poop test, the ovum parasites. So they look in there and see little squirmy things. I will honestly say that is not always, it is the easiest way to find intestinal parasites, but it does miss things like amoebic and microscopic issues sometimes. So that's great for worms. It will detect most of your worms, but there are other types of amoebic things that are harder to spot, and you have to like see the symptom, have a risk factor, and do a specific test for that. So when somebody comes in and they say, I've got parasites, I was like, usually my first question is, have you been diagnosed with parasites? And they're like, no. I was like, then why do you think you have a parasite? And so there's a few things that I look for. Exposure to parasites, i.e. traveled someplace like a tropical place, went to the Amazon, went to the Nile River. It seems to go around rivers. Like everybody I know of who's been on the Nile River came back with horrible food poisoning. So usually I look for a bout of food poisoning, exposure into a tropical area, traveling to farms, especially if you like worked a farm for, woofing somewhere that you were like, oh, I was walking barefoot through the sheep pasture or something. There's a very real possibility. People who eat a lot of raw food, whether that's, like they're on the all sushi diet, they're on the all raw vegetable diet, because cooking our food is one of the ways that we kill parasites. So if you're eating a lot of raw stuff, there's an increased risk. If you have a pet and that pet likes to sleep in the bed with you and that pet goes outside, I'm assuming that most dogs and half the cats all go outside, they are likely to be carrying something really boring, but they're likely to have things like pinworms and so forth. And so if that animal sleeps in your bed with you, or like you don't close your bedroom door when you go to work in the morning, I guarantee that critter is sleeping on your pillow. So there is an increased risk that having animals are getting in there. But if you're like, I microwave all my food, it's all horribly packaged, I live on the 27th floor in a condominium, I hate dirt, I never go outside, chances are you don't have any parasites. And you're just reading too much stuff. Unless you really date a lot of farmers, in which case there's a possibility. You can look for unexplained issues like, and I'm going to give one of my favorite examples. If you're a vegan who doesn't like vegetables, you have poor digestion, and you're fatigued and have skin rashes, although I could blame it on parasites, the chances are that you're just not getting enough nutrition. And so if there's a reason for you to have those other symptoms like fatigue or a skin rash that can be explained in a likely pathway, then that's more appropriate to pursue that. And so it's really important about looking at the whole person, possible reasons why you've got an issue, and then ultimately testing to figure that out. And so when you go and you buy a parasite cleanse, it's like, here, this has got 5 to 50 herbs in there. This cures all the parasites. And that's just a lie. It doesn't work. The parasites, the herbs are very specific for specific types of parasites. And it's frequently important to put other types of herbs in as well. And my favorite example is always tapeworms. Tapeworms can get really creepy, cause malnutrition because they're literally sucking the life out of you. But they attach to the intestinal walls, like they got fangs and they hold on. So if you irritate them, a part of the segment might break off if you just use a bunch of cathartic herbs that just make you have explosive diarrhea, which is very common. Part of it will break off, but that head's still on there, hanging on, drinking your blood and eating your food. And so in a case like that, we have to cause it to relax its grip. And so we use a combination of herbs to do that. And ultimately, we have to be pooping. And so you'll oftentimes find cathartic things. You'll see rhubarb root or something to more dramatically move the poop out. A lot of the antiparasitics cause explosive diarrhea, which not always what everybody needs, right? And so we also have to make sure that we're drinking enough water because you're losing fluids when you're doing that as well. Antiparasitics are oftentimes draining, so somebody who's exhausted already, they're really deficient and fatigued, and we do long-term antiparasitics, you're going to make them more and more exhausted. And so really important that we support the organism we want to live whilst we expel the organisms we don't want to live and we want to remove from the body. It's really helpful to know a particular type of parasite because parasites are reproducing in your body. And so most parasites will have a life cycle. So it just depends on what that life cycle is on how we dose our herbs. Pinworms are usually my favorite. It's usually dose for a week, take 2 weeks off, dose for a week. And I'll play with that a little bit just depending on what's going on. And then we also have to not just if like, oh, I got an itchy butt, I think I got pinworms, which little things that look like a grain of rice. We'll talk more about them in a second. If you don't treat everybody in the house, to include your pets, you're just going to reinfect with it. And so we want to get rid of them as they emerge before they can reproduce. And so we can literally, I hate to say this, you Google their life cycle and how they reproduce. But then we also have to like wash your sheets in hot water, maybe use some sort of bleach or similar type of thing that's more killy, using hot water, or some people just throw their stuff out. If it's a parasite that's walking around in your carpet, then using things like diatomaceous earth externally can be really helpful, not particularly helpful internally. So really important to define our parasites clearly. Afterwards, we have to rebuild the person or the organism, because it could be a dog or a cat. If it's really toxic stuff, we may have to add probiotics in that to rebuild the gut, and that can take a long period of time. Things that, let's look at the symptoms here. Exposure, so we want to make sure that there is some opportunity for exposure. If one person in the house has parasites, good chance everybody does. Unexplained skin rashes, and there are literally probably 1,000 reasons for skin rashes, so it is one possible reason. Digestive issues that can't be explained. If you're on the all barbecue diet and you have acid reflux and alternating constipation and diarrhea, I'm going to say, and bloating, I'd say like, no, that's pretty easy to explain. You're probably on a yummy diet, but not a healthy one. But if you're like, no, I eat really good, I always had this really good digestive system, daily bowel movements, no bloating, no gas, I got food poisoning, I got over that, but my gut hasn't recovered and it's been a year. Like, it could be something. So that would be worth exploring. Unexplained fatigue, unexplained anemia, unexplained allergies, unexplained, usually red eyes, unexplained fever and chills, because things like malaria. And then there's pain, unexplained pain. And so if I, was out juggling chainsaws, moving logs like I was for the past week, and I have pain, it's very easy to explain. I overdid it. But if I'm like, I didn't do anything out of the ordinary, and all of a sudden all my joints hurt, or, then we're like, oh, that's unexplained pain. And so there's a possible reason for that. So we're always saying, like, why do you think you have that symptom? And if we're like, oh, it's probably because I XYZ, then you're like, okay, let's explore that. If you're like, oh, freaking no, it just came out of nowhere, there is a possibility then that there's a parasitic involvement to that. Digestive stuff is usually going to be a digestive parasite. Bloodborne ones like your mosquito and tick-borne diseases tend to be all over the place. And I would say even more important than any of the other. The intestinal parasites, irritating, like whatever. But the bloodborne ones can cause damage to stuff like, obviously chronic Lyme disease causes a whole host of symptoms and co-infections with things like Babesia. Left untreated, those can cause things like organ damage, as trichomonas. Eating uncooked pork can cause liver damage. I'm trying to think of other good ones. Even malaria can start to cause, completely untreated. I don't know why that would happen. Can cause organ damages. Things like chikungunya and dengue fever can cause extreme anemia and death if left untreated. So really important that we define those and get them treated as quickly as possible. All right, let's talk about some herbs. Let's do some, and pets. What I always say, it's like, it can just be diet, but if your pets are outside, pets tend to eat grass, they tend to lick their own butts, they eat dirt, they do all kinds of things. Cats, the same thing. If they're indoor-outdoor cats, they're eating lizards and birds and things they're not supposed to, and they're not cooked and sterilized. So there's a good chance that they're getting critters from those outdoor critters they're eating. Certainly the same is true for the dogs. Excessive butt licking, or for dogs, they're going to drag their butt on the ground all over your carpet, which is really irritating because the butt itches. And so they're doing something to try to alleviate that. They'll get erratic poop, not necessarily accidents. For cats, obviously, you've got the litter box. If you're walking your dog, looking at their poop or getting a stick and breaking it apart right after they poop and looking for things that move. Nothing should be moving in their poop. And even things like blood in the dog or cat poop can be indicative of some types of parasites. Those are the biggies for them. Where do I go with that? So I'm going to talk about the most common one that we see in children, adults, dogs and cats, and that's pinworms. They literally look like a grain of rice. They're white and they're about the quarter of an inch long. They tend to come out at night, and so the easiest way, if you have a pet, go set your alarm for midnight, or just if you're up, take a flashlight when it's dark out and shine it on your dog's butt or your cat's butt. And if you see a little grain of rice, it may not even be moving, but if you see a little grain of rice that's stuck in their fur around their butt, you've got pinworms. If your dog or cat has it, you do too. That is literally the single most common one. Children get it a lot of times playing in sandboxes, because cats who are indoor-outdoor, and it doesn't have to be your cat. What about all the other cats that are wandering around that your neighbors have? raccoons, all of that, they bury their poop in the sandbox because it looks like a litter box. And then your kid goes and, yay, I'm going to play in the sandbox, and kids put stuff in their mouth. And so little kids who are itching their butt a lot frequently have pinworms. Same thing. Take off their diaper, check on their butt, shine a light on their butt. You're going to see it. I won't horrify you and tell you how they get into you, but let's just say they do. And they will travel outside of the host critter into the new host critter and spread their joy everywhere. A lot of your other ones are going to come from uncooked stuff, and I say that because it can be uncooked meats. It can come from unwashed vegetables that are not cooked. So like salads are good for us. Yeah-ish. I love a good salad as much as the next person, but there is a higher likelihood of both from the people who process that maybe didn't wash their hands. We hear about the cantaloupe and the bean sprouts and the arugula. All these recalls are always from things that are eaten raw, from somebody who didn't wash their hands. Or over a facility, a bird flew over while that truck was going through, or in your grocery store, the critters come out at night, the mice and rats, maybe they're dumping stuff on the products and gets into that. So not only washing your hands, washing your food, but cooking food saved us from a lot of problems. And so my running joke, some of you have heard this, if you're sick, would your grandmama bring you soup or a salad? And so most of us would answer soup of some sort because it's easier to digest, but it's also cleaner. It has been sterilized from parasites, and most nutrients are not destroyed. The only thing that is, and it's not like if the second you turn on a little bit of heat, it vanishes, but vitamin C is the one nutrient that does break down over time with more heat. Other things just from picking them break down, but ultimately parasites, they hang out, and so the longer we cook things, the more likely we are to kill them. So pets bringing it in, playing in the dirt, and I love to play in the dirt, so I must be covered in parasites. Think about all the herb walks that I do where I just like pick up a leaf and start sticking it in my mouth. I don't wash it or anything. I probably have a bazillion parasites, and yet I have no symptoms of parasites. So go figure. I don't sweat it too much. A lot of the scarier tropical ones we start to see that are amoebic and so forth. I think most people would go to the doctor because there's like blood and pus and things like that. And you can quickly become, dehydrated to death and so forth. I've had to treat a number of folks, like pinworms, super boring. I've had a number of people, I have a lot of connections in Central and South America where the medications people are like, no, I got infected by this one riverborne thing that comes in the water. It's really common. Nothing works for it. And even their native herbs, either the information is lost or it's not working, that I usually revert to the Chinese herbs for that, for those more serious cases. And so far I'm betting 1,000 on the intestinal parasites from strange tropical places. I haven't had, and half the bloodborne ones are like piece of cake. Let's start talking about some herbs because that's what we're supposed to be doing. So this is my favorite. I did bring them. Epazote is probably my go-to for pinworms. It is literally a long history of being used for pinworms. It is a culinary spice, so it's frequently added to beans to help with like the gassy bloatiness. This is a Florida native. It grows from, I'm sure, further afield than that, but I know for sure Mexico, Texas, and Florida. This is a very common herb to find just walking around like parking lots and open fields. You can grow this. I don't think we have any in the nursery right now. I won't say it tastes good, but it's not horrific. But this is a really good one. Everybody knows Artemisias, so wormwood, yay, there we go. So it's really funny. So I just had somebody bring me in a bottle. They were like, oh, take a look at all my supplements. And the common name was wormwood, but the Latin name they had was the wrong one. There's the Latin name for it. But it had sweet Annia. It said wormwood, but then it was Artemisia annua. And so when I see a product that doesn't know what they're giving to somebody, I'm like, nope, that's scary. And when I tasted it, it was horrific. Artemisia is good for both intestinal as well as bloodborne parasites, but there are some problems. Artemisia is a very strong herb. It can affect your menses. It's an abortive, so it is not safe to use if you're pregnant, and it is very drying and dispersing, and so for somebody who's like really thin and dry or constipated, it's actually really challenging. If they're on medications, any of your artemisias are likely to interfere with your medications, and I say that a lot of your artemisias are used for cancer. They actually extract the artemisian out of there. It's used for malaria. It's used for amoebic stuff. It's used for Lyme and Babesia. But I hate to say it, the functional medicine docs love the sweet Annie and the wormwood and the artemisias, but they just like, oh, here you go. And they're as bad as TikTok, where they're just like, here, everybody needs this. Because you've got a symptom, and they don't differentiate on people. And so I love me some wormwood, but wormwood, mugwort, sweet Annie. There's an African wormwood that's used for more spiritual practices, and a lot of the history. And boy, I didn't even go into that. Sorry for the ADD. Parasites are usually something squirmy, whether it's a squirmy microscopic thing in your blood or a squirmy thing in your intestines. There's also spiritual parasites, and so the act of smudging, the act of limpias are to get things that attack us, the pests that inhabit space with us that are invisible. And so spiritual parasites, friends group parasites, we all have one or two of those, I'm sure. That people who exhaust us after we spend even a small amount of time with us, those are parasites. And so a lot of your wormwood, a lot of your artemisias are used as smudge in the same way sage is used as smudge. Those are frequently used to get spiritual parasites off of us. Black walnut, it's funny. There's another one, nothing wrong with using it. I don't use this one a lot, and for no particular reason. It does contain some alkaloids in there that are killy for intestinal worms. I've heard of being used for bloodborne parasites. I've not used it. The black walnut, for most folks, causes constipation. Occasionally, it will cause some loose stools, but like it's always a trick to create that balanced formula to make sure the poop is still moving there. Kansas, man, we got folks from all over. This is one that's not talked about very much, bitter melon, but I like to talk about it because it grows here. I was just setting up for Shopapalooza for tomorrow, and as I was walking along, I was like, oh, look, I don't usually see it this late in the season. There was a huge bush covered with bitter melon. So it's an interesting thing. Although the leaves of bitter melon, and so there's a island version of bitter melon, and that's the one I like to work with the most. There's also in Ayurvedic or Indian bitter melon that's a little bit larger. And then there's the Chinese bitter melon, where they eat the fruit and don't use the leaves as much. So the Caribbean one, we primarily use the leaf. The leaf is very dry, very cold and bitter, and is used for amoebic type of things that are really phlegmy. It's used for blood sugar issues like diabetes. And you'll see, every time you see like Caribbean bitter melon, Surasy, it'll say antiparasitic. It's used for malaria, so it's used for bloodborne stuff. But the actual seeds of this are listed as toxic, and a lot of our plants that are toxic are antiparasitic. And so the seeds, if you just like, I always talk about the little red pulp that's on it. You can suck the pulp off, and it's actually really sweet and gets rid of the bitter flavor. And people were like, well, as a kid, I ate the seeds. I was like, you probably didn't chew them up. If you just swallow the seed, it'll just pass through your digestive tract. Nothing too weird will happen. If you chew the seed, it is toxic. A lot of seeds have toxicity in them, and it will become explosive caustic diarrhea. It's antiparasitic. So although I don't recommend that, it is the seeds that are the really strong antiparasitic cathartic pooping substance in there. Stay in the theme of Western. Jamaican dogwood herbs. And I would say in general, your dogwoods are frequently, not just the Jamaican dogwood, many of your dogwoods are antiparasitic, but the Jamaican dogwood is paralyzes the parasites, and so by itself it doesn't do anything. The Jamaican dogwood has to be combined with a strong herb that causes peristalsis, that pushes them out. So it will, in the same way Jamaican dogwood is fish poison herb, like we mash up the bark and we put it in a small pond, the fish will float up. So it's literally paralyzes their gills. And it kind of does the same thing for the intestinal parasites, that it will make them relax and become paralyzed, and they'll come back to life. So we have to use something to push them out, i.e. pooping herbs, and it doesn't have to be toxic or anything. It just means something to clean your guts out. Not fun, but for 24 hours you're going to be pooping a lot. So it could be something as boring and simple as a lot of magnesium, like you do the magnesium oxide to clean out for colonoscopy. So it'll clean you out, and it does it with gusto. So you could use something like that in order to help move out any parasites that you've gotten out there. I frequently will add kava to my antiparasitic formulas as well. I specifically use kava and the Jamaican dogwood both in combination for suspected tapeworms or diagnosed tapeworms. And then again, something to move it on out. The Chinese, and Western herbs. So it's really funny. There's a bunch of things that we eat them because we like it, but most of your culinary aromatic herbs are mild antiparasitics. They are specific for intestinal parasites. So rosemary, oregano, thyme, fennel, all of those are mild antiparasitics. Garlic, phenomenal antiparasitic for both bloodborne and for intestinal. Your peppers, so cayenne pepper, the classic, right? But peppers are used, they create the solanase chemical to keep bugs from eating it. So you don't, it's a bad thing when you see tomatoes and pepper leaves are being eaten by your bugs. Those are some hardy bugs. But they literally have in there things that retard insects from eating them that are toxic. I do not recommend this, but tobacco is a strong antiparasitic. We can spray it on plants to do stuff. It will make you vomit and have diarrhea. It is very caustic. If anybody ever had a lot of fun trying to use aversion therapy on you as a kid and gave you some chewing tobacco, if you grew up in the countryside and you basically gagged and vomited for a good, couple of hours, then that's one way to get those parasites out. It is a cleanse. But so for single herbs in Chinese medicine is kind of cool. Our diagnostics are very specific, and we tend to already have formulas written for us for very specific patterns, which makes our job a little bit easier. And then we use our experience or suggestions of the historical reference to adjust either the dosage or add or subtract herbs based on certain symptoms. But when it comes to antiparasitics, that's one of the categories where we don't have to use the classical formulas, because a lot of the classical formulas use like scary toxic stuff like, I don't think we want to put that in a human or an animal for that matter. But the single herb book I like what's called Chen and Chen. John and Tina Chen wrote this book. This is our textbook that we use in the program. And in chapter 10 is our anti-parasitic herbs. And there's not a bunch, but it will give you all the symptoms of the different parasites. But let's... And it has things in there like pumpkin seed, which I love because I just like pumpkin seeds. But I'm going to put up this chart because, sorry, camera and Bob, I don't know if everybody can read that, but this lists the different herbs and what we can use and what they're good for. So there's a couple of them that are definitely weirdly Chinese. The Shizhunzi is very commonly used. It's kind of hard to find. I've heard you can grow this here. Oh, they're already broken. These aren't as pretty. They've got kind of a cool shape to them when you get them sometimes. Those aren't worth showing you. But this is very commonly used. It's specific for roundworms, pinworms, and can be used for trichomonas. But it's a gentle pooping herb. Oh, let's see who's up next. This one is a challenge. This is betel nut, Bing Lan, and this is an abused substance. I'm actually surprised we're allowed to have it. It causes weird staining in your teeth. People chew this with a alkalizing agent to get a stimulant buzz off of it. Betel nut chewers, you can Google that later. But this also helps with pinworms, some other bloodborne parasites, and will frequently cause diarrhea on a lot of folks. So this is very dose dependent. But that said, the dosage they use as an antiparasitic is really high and would only be like a 1 or 2 doses of it. This is the one I probably use the most of, Feizi. And there we go. I believe there is the same genus is native to Florida, and I have not grown this plant yet. It grows more in the South Florida and the Keys. It is on my list to do my homework on this to see whether the native people here in Florida use this the same way as the Chinese did. And this one, and I hate to say it, when I'm making a parasite formula for somebody, I look this stuff up. I don't even pretend to memorize it because I don't do it often enough. This one is for tapeworms, hookworms, pinworms, and helps you poop. So, yay. But then there's a couple of fun ones. Ooh, sorry about that horrible sound. Wu Mei is in a different section. This is in the stop pooping. So this is a Wu Mei plum. Oops, here, that's easier if you see it that way. Wu Mei. And so this is a very specific type of plum. It's salted. It is specific for... Oh, let's see. I gotta cheat and look at my label here. Blah, 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 stops cough. It stops pooping, but is specific for roundworms and abdominal pain. This one, there's different parts of this. We only use the seeds. I don't carry the bark. I'll try to find a whole one here. This is the Chinaberry tree that is a horrible invasive here in Florida. Oh, come on. And when we do the school camping trip, there's a whole field of these everywhere. You might have these growing in your yard. This is for qi stagnation, but is also antiparasitic. The bark is used classically. Xuanlianzi. The bark is used, but the bark's also really toxic. And I don't use it because you can also hurt people with this. I'll use this pretty commonly. Again, short-term use. And I did the Wume. Shilupi. So all of you have access to this. Whoops. Shilupi is pomegranate. So this is the peel from pomegranate. We use it to stop pooping. So I really like the Shilu pea for intestinal parasites that cause diarrhea, or it's not in here. I use that one for amoebic type of parasites. It's really common to use. After we do this, and again, creating a formula around it and treating the pattern of folks, it's really important then to correct things like chances are really good you threw their gut flora out of balance. So following it up with some probiotics is really helpful, and making sure that you treat the household as well. So cleaning the sheets, cleaning the carpet, eliminating the risk factors. Couple that we didn't talk about. Ooh, I gotta find the chat so you guys know what crazy words I'm about to say. There we go. Dan Shen is a Chinese herb that we find in the Western herbal pharmacy much more now. This is Salvia militariza. This, I find, will take the antiparasitic formula and put it into the bloodstream and into the heart. So we don't have to, it's in and of itself, it's not that antiparasitic. It has some value for that. But I'll use this for suspected early stage heartworms. I'll use this for malaria, chronic malaria, any of our bloodborne stuff. I'll frequently add this into my tick-borne diseases like babesia. Come on, Bob, you had another one on the tip of your head. And then the sweet Annie. Annie, there we go. This is also known as Qing Hao. And Qing Hao is an interesting one. This is an Artemisia annua. I use this one more than I use wormwood. I think it's a little bit more gentle. It's still very dry. It can still mess with the menses, blah, blah, blah. This is the one, they extracted an alkaloid out of this called artemisian that was shown to have 100% success, 99% success rate in treating malaria. Really amazing, Nobel Peace Prize, la 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 la. The problem is now we're starting to see some strains of malaria that are resistant to this drug because basically people have diluted it, try to extend it, or make money off of it. But it is classically used in Chinese herbal medicine to treat malaria. And so we see this 1,000-year history of its use. And so research backed it up. But what it is they wanted to isolate the alkaloid so that they could slap a patent on it and make some money. So when I have people who, for whatever reason, choose not to do their anti-malarial medications, I'll give them enough of the sweet Annie to start before they leave the country, continue it daily in country, and then to continue it for 2 weeks after they get on the plane and leave a place that has malaria. And like places that have malaria, Tampa, Sarasota, obviously the Caribbean, tropics, South America, Africa has the highest rate of malaria, but everywhere's got it at this point. And so far I'm batting 1,000. I have not had a single person get malaria who's used it, but my best example was I had a group of people from the local area here that were going to, I believe it was East Africa, to do some relief work. And about 3 of them did the sweet Annie, the Qing Hao. And let me get back to that, Susan. That's a great question. It worked on, none of those people who took it got malaria. People who took the prescription medication, which has its own issues like psychotic breaks a week or so after you start taking it, only about 60% successful. And so 1 or 2 of them got it. And then all of the people who's like, malaria is not real, all of them got malaria. Like, not even a question. And so lots of things like wearing long sleeve shirt, using bug spray, blah, 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 to avoid it. But literally, if you're going into an area that is highly infected with malaria mosquitoes, you got to do something. So I had somebody who spent, I think it was like 3 or 4 months in India, in southern India. They were on a yoga retreat and doing all kinds of cool stuff. They had rented a small apartment, so they were living very much as anybody else would. And a lot of times, if you go to a touristy area and you eat the touristy food and you don't drink the water, you usually do okay. But if you're like, I'm going native, I'm going to drink the water and eat the food and live in the same conditions that everybody there does, our bodies are not accustomed to some of the challenges that happen when we make that abrupt switch to that. And so very, very common that people get really sick and a lot of food poisoning, a lot of digestive issues, and especially a lot of intestinal parasites. And so I had a couple who went and did it, and the woman did the meds, and she chose to do those, and she did fine. But she ended up with multiple rounds of food poisoning while she was there, and they were being careful as one could be. He did the herbs religiously. I think he actually exceeded what I told them to do, and they ate the same food. He never got food poisoning, got none of the amoebic dysentery. She had to get IV antibiotics and fluids because she was really sick for 3 days. And so when we look at the historical use of things like Sweet Annie, the Qing Hao, it has a use well beyond just malaria. It's what the research was done. And this is true of so many of these things. We have to always say, what's the traditional use and what's the research say? Both are valid. So let me go to some of the tick-borne diseases. I got to do my station identification. Sorry. If you're just joining us, you don't know who I am. I'm Bob Linde. I am an herbalist and an acupuncturist here in St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm the owner of Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies, multi-practitioner practice here 6 days a week in St. Pete. You can find out more at AcuHerbals, AcuHerbals.com, and the director of the Tradition School of Herbal Studies, where we have both a Western and Chinese herbal program, as well as lots of just cool standalone fun classes. The Western Chinese programs are all the way from beginner as to what's an herb, all the way to practitioner, and really unique in that we do have for both programs, hands-on weekly clinical practice is such an important part of it. And so I'm a fan of anybody who wants to be a clinical herbalist. It's so important that you get some sort of supervised practice. For those of you who are like, I don't want to learn herbs, but I sure want to try them because nothing else is working, certainly make an appointment with one of our great acupuncturists or herbalists that are here. All of the people who are seeing clients here or patients studied at least 2 years under me personally. And you've also got the option if price is an issue, that you can get student clinic. So Monday night I supervise acupuncture interns from Dragon Rises, the acupuncture school in Sarasota. And Tuesday night is our Western herb senior students there, and Wednesday night is our Chinese herb students. And so either me or one of the other senior practitioners here is supervising them all 3 of those nights. And just call and schedule an appointment, bring your blood work, bring your supplements, bring everything you got, and they'll sort through it and put together based on your energetic imbalances rather than taking an herb for a disease. They'll use a more traditional methodology to put the right herbs together, and our goal is to create balance, and that means that the herbs you start with are not the herbs that you finish with, and that's really such an interesting point. It's like if we're doing a good job, the herbs you took this month will change what you need 1 month, 3 months, or 6 months later on, and our goal ultimately is to teach people how to maintain their health. So it's one of those things where we're talking about what's healthy eating, and there's not a set diet. Like everybody has to do XYZ diet. It's like, what are your imbalances? Like for me, raw food is the worst thing that ever I could do to my body. So I should be eating mostly soups and stews. I won't say I'm great about that, but who's perfect? And so I constantly need my herbal support because of my bad choices, because I love ice cream and pizza. Who doesn't love ice cream and pizza? It just doesn't love me. So let's talk a little bit about blood-borne diseases. I promise I'll get to a couple of those other questions that we were on there. So Mosquito-borne diseases are actually pretty easy. Malaria is the most common one that becomes chronic, and like Sweet Annie is the right answer. Like just hands down, there's prescription meds you can take as well. But it is important that we start to recognize some of, like, as we see global warming, we are seeing things that we heard about in Central America or the Southern Caribbean are now commonplace. Like 2 years in a row, we've had outbreaks of dengue and malaria here in Tampa Bay region, and like not just 1 or 2 cases, but we're getting a dozen cases of those. And certainly as we travel overseas to, fun places in the Caribbean or Central South America, you're going to get exposed to things. And the more remote areas that we go to, if we're going to Southern Asia, India, Sri Lanka, if we're going to Africa, in a lot of the tropical Africa countries there, you're going to get exposed to stuff that's not normal. And not to say we can still figure it out, but like the ova and parasite, the poop test, they may not spot some of those things. Sometimes you actually have to find a tropical disease specialist to go to do, and say like, hey, I was eating some weird stuff when I was in this place. I need somebody who knows about the weird diseases in that place. So it is important to sometimes see a specialist. But when we look at, outside of our mosquito-borne diseases, our tick-borne diseases are challenging because they frequently become chronic. With Lyme and the Lyme co-infection, it is so important that if you suspect or get Lyme or Lyme co-infection in those early stages, when in that first, I'm going to say, month or so that you get bit, doing, as much as I dislike the overuse of antibiotics, it is appropriate to try to smack it back with antibiotics. Here's the interesting thing about antibiotics. You can do a lot of our, my students will recognize this term, but killy herbs, things that kill stuff, right? Whether those are bacteria, virus, fungus, whatever, but they're frequently helpful to take the herbs and the antibiotics together to improve their effectiveness. The problem with everybody's like Lyme disease, bullseye rash, it only happens half the time. And so you might feel like you're just coming down with the flu or something, not even that bad, or like I'm a little under the weather today, and you go on with your day, you never know that you got bit by a tick. And when we look at the co-infections, especially the co-infections or the regional versions of Lyme disease, like Florida, we have a unique strains that we have down here. They don't show up on the standard tests. And so until they come up with a few better tests and you can pay out of pocket for the better tests, it's iffy. I should have looked it up ahead of time. I believe it's the Rappaport Lyme Inventory Test. Is a kind of a questionnaire that moves you towards maybe you got a tick-borne disease of some sort. A lot of the things will say like, we're not sure what you got, but you got some kind of chronic viral-y thing. There are a lot of protocols out there for Lyme co-infection. They occasionally work. They definitely will knock symptoms back. But I tend to, I've read the protocols, I'm familiar with them. Some of them I don't do because it's just outside of my experience, because they're using some off-label medications that they get kind of under the counter or from veterinarian feed stores. I'm like, you're on your own on that. I would say that the herbs frequently are helpful, but matching the herbs to the person, matching the symptoms to the person, I think is really important. And so, things like teasel root, Japanese teasel root, really common in the Lyme realm. Like everybody needs teasel root. It's specific for pain. So it's actually traumatology that focuses on the spine and the lower body. And so if you have fatigue, that may not be that helpful for you. And so it's like, how is your Lyme? And we see that Lyme and the co-infections attack a particular part. Some goes to the brain fog, some goes into other parts. And so it's really such a unique thing to piece it together. And most of the people I see with Lyme have already dropped all their money at one of the local clinics here that claims to cure Lyme disease every day. And after they go broke, they throw them out in the street because they've run up $50,000 in debt. And so there's a few local herbs that I love for chronic Lyme disease. The most basic one, all y'all are going to know it, Spanish needle, beggar's tick, whatever you want to call it, Biden's alba. Oops, that is not what I want there. Let's try that again. Biden's alba. There we go. And I saw somebody was from Texas. I know this grows in Texas. I think I saw Kansas. I have no idea. I think of it as a subtropical plant, so I don't think that grows in your area. You can buy it, but like here in Florida, it's a weed that literally everybody is like cussing. And so this is something we can eat. It's a vegetable. It's super safe. Is used historically for a variety, everything from chronic Lyme disease to chronic Lyme disease. So excellent for that. Has an affinity to the lungs, and I would say it's just a good antimicrobial. The other one I've worked with less, but again, Sida. And it's so funny. Sida spa means all the different species work just fine. All parts of this plant can be used. The roots have ephedrine in them, which has some contraindications to it, like high blood pressure, anxiety, insomnia disorders. The ephedrine is very stimulating. But the other parts of the plant don't have any ephedrine in them, but have antimicrobial properties, and again, specific for chronic Lyme disease. So acute Lyme disease or acute tick-borne disease, go do the antibiotics, please. Take some herbs with that. You're like, well, 10 years later, going to 1,000 doctors, I figured out I got, then it's more appropriate. And again, this is called wireweed, broomweed, and it's a weed in your yard. It's in the mallow family. So a really nice thing. I wish I could say like, and I know there was a question about Babesia. I'm going to say like, it's so specific. Babesia has 50 symptoms that are common with it. Fatigue, oftentimes leading the parades, sometimes body pain, sometimes rashes. And so it's like another herb, like for rashes, I really like, I'm going to say spa again, Smilax spa. This is Greenbrier Smilax. There's for rashes. I don't know. The Chinese name for it is Tufu. Oops. Ling. Actually, Susan, you probably know this under a Mexican name. Oops. Smilax medica. Yeah, I think I'm oh, shiza. God, autocorrect. Smilax. Sorry, typing dysfunction. Smilax medica. There we go. Grows in Mexico. I think I spelled that wrong. The Smilax is right. The medica is wrong. Is specific. It is the herb of commerce for chronic skin rashes. It has some steroidal-like action, also some antimicrobial kind of properties as well. Alpha-gal is the new star child evil plant of the tick-borne diseases. Alpha-gal, and a lot of you probably have never heard of this. Alpha-gal. Alpha-gal is referencing a particular substance that's contained in meat. It makes you allergic to meat. It's from the Lone Star tick, I believe. And literally, like, you're like the all barbecue, all carnivore diet. You get bit by that tick, you'll become violently ill, messed up, and not well known in the medical industry yet. I wish, I've only had one patient with alpha-gal, and that's not what they came in for, and so I didn't really get to work on it. They had it under control, and they were, and without a doubt, finding all the hidden places, like ask your vegan friends, all the hidden places where meat and meat byproducts are. depending on the severity of how your infection of alpha-gal goes, you may be like not able to put on chapstick because it's got some alpha-gal components in there. So really a crappy one. And there's so many different tick-borne diseases out there that they all manifest a little bit differently and require a little bit different treatment. And that's really the fun thing about using traditional herbal systems, because it's not what herb is good for. It's like, how does your body present with? And cool if we have a medical diagnosis, but we don't need the medical diagnosis in order to approach so many of these really odd chronic or new diseases or old diseases that just aren't in our understanding of stuff yet. All right, I'm going to stop babbling on about of parasites. I think I got all of those. I did talk about animals a little bit. I will say epazote is safe for cats, but so many of these herbs are not cat safe. Cats are weird. Please, please, please don't use essential oils on your animals in general, but cats specifically cannot process essential oils. And I know people who are doing like oil of oregano and things like that, and that is potentially deadly for cats. Cats already have iffy kidneys, and anything that's processed through the kidney and liver on kitty cats is dangerous. So really looking at the few herbs that might be safe, and if you've got a cat with a parasite, like find out what parasite they've got so you don't have to experiment with 20 different herbs on them. And the medications do work. Oh, and I was going off on a tangent. I will say an interesting thing about hookworms. I do not recommend this. I actually have had a few people ask me. I strongly discourage it. But there is an underground treatment for autoimmune disorders using hookworms. And my point in even saying this is not that everybody goes out and goes wandering around the sheep fields in bare feet. But when we say the word parasites and we don't define that, and because it's frequently looking at gut dysbiosis, i.e. your good bacteria is out of whack, it's out of balance, hookworm is a for real parasite, right? And it seems to put most autoimmune disorders into remission whilst that's an active infection in your body. And so there's a whole illegal trade of people literally mailing vials of hookworm or medical tourism travel to Africa, where it's very common, to go walk around some farmer's field in their bare feet. And so parasites, some are benign, some are deadly, and some are actually really beneficial. So don't always assume we got to kill everything that's in our body. We have a symbiotic relationship, just like there's a lot of critters in our world that are symbiotic. And so making sure that we understand what we're doing when we're putting all this literally poison into our body. I would say eating a variety of cooked things and aromatic plants and spicy plants all have some level of antiparasitic properties to it. All right, let me see. I wrote down other questions. Sorry, Pickles, I almost forgot you. So Jatropha, she was asking, and there's a couple of plants in the Jatropha genus. They generally are toxic. And this, and sorry, nobody knows what I just said. I hope I spelled this right. Jatropha. I'm going to say spa. So spa, remember, just means species. So this is a very oily, usually it's the fruit, the seed fruit that we use on this, and it's extremely oily. If you Google this, it's going to say it's toxic. And then in the next breath, it's going to say, and it's used for all of these things. Parasites, skin disorders being amongst them. Baldness, if I remember right, too. They're referring to it topically, or some of these plants that I just talked about, oh my God, China berry tree. This is the Xuanlianzi. This is poisonous, as are most antiparasitics. It's just degrees of poison and dose dependent. And so the alkaloid in the Jatropha is compared to ricin in, oh my God, invasive weed, whose name just, castor. It's compared to that. It's not the same. It's not ricin. Only the castor bean has the ricin. But it has a similarly toxic, caustic, purgative value to the Jatropha. Too much might kill you. Take a small amount, you might just wish you were dying because you're just going to be vomiting and diarrhea for a period of time. But your parasites will be removed with gusto. I do not recommend that by any stretch of the imagination. It is just not the right thing. It's used for a lot of spiritual purposes, and it's used topically for any number of dry skin conditions because it's the oiliness of the seeds that's used, especially for like fungal rashes and things like that. It can be used as a soak, a wash, or a compress. And it's also famous for a lot of the Jatrophas are referred to as biodiesel trees. And so, zombie apocalypse, you can squeeze the oils out and make a combustible fuel out of it. I've not done that personally, although I'd squeeze some juice out. I understand some of the species, and I don't remember, like you were asking specifically about the Buddha, I always call it Buddha belly. It's not that, but it's the belly one. I believe some of them are used for plant dyes, but I don't know what cool colors you get out of it. I have not done I've done a little bit of playing with dyes, plant dyes, but not my area of expertise. Other animals, most of these herbs we talked about can be used for other animals. Epizote is cat safe. I've used it on horses. Children as young as 6 months, I think. Cats, dogs, horses. I don't think I've used it for. I don't know, I might have done like a llama at some point. I think some goats. So yeah, I think of the Epizote as very safe. With cats, I don't have a go-to. It's usually Epizote for intestinal parasites. I would get fancier, and I hate to say it, I get my books out and I do my homework when I'm working with cats. I usually, well, my students all know that I'm like 3 independent references. And so I don't trust any single book when I'll look at 3 different books. I have like all of the books on pet herbal care. Some I trust more than others, but then I will also double check it and go to PubMed and see if there's new information, because research changes. We find out new stuff, even some historical stuff. So it's always good to double check it. So some of the stuff, like, if you're a dog, sorry, I always go to the doggies. Garlic's toxic to dogs. Yeah, not really. Like, if they eat a couple of cloves of garlic, bad things are going to happen, and it could be deadly. But the reality is, you'll find a little bit of garlic added to some dog foods. It's a great antiparasitic, and I would look it up before I did it with cats, because I honestly don't remember. So a lot of times you have to go to some original resource, and it's either a chemical that's in there, or it's a cumulative toxicity. And so, like, there's a lot of things that we consume that either have to be processed, we consume that are toxic and deadly even. Cassava being one of those. So it either has to be processed, or it's very dose dependent, or it's a short-term use only herb. And so there are definitely things that are like, don't let your cat eat that or it could die. But there's other things where it's like, don't give it to them every day. But cats do get a lot of parasites, and so sometimes it is appropriate to do the medications. And if those don't work, or keep your cats inside so that they're eating, because cats, they gonna kill some stuff if they're outdoors, and dogs too. I don't mean to beat up on the kitty cats. They're gonna end up with parasites, but pinworms is the most common. Sometimes they get a little bit more interesting than that. I'm gonna come back to tinnitus if we have psoriasis. So psoriasis is an autoimmune disorder, and autoimmune skin disorder that, and this is true of a lot of autoimmune disorders. But eczema and psoriasis both have a strong gut association. I would say always. And it doesn't mean that if I just stop eating this, my psoriasis will go away. With eczema, I'm going to say 99.9% of the time, it's food. Fix the food, it'll be fine. Psoriasis is harder to pinpoint it. With psoriasis, you'll have initial psoriasis as an infant. It goes away and then comes back at adulthood, or sometimes it just you got it as a little baby and just got worse as you got older. It's more common with preemies, with neurotube defects, with other allergies, and what I'm finding, oh sure, pull weird stuff out, Susan. I was just talking to somebody about the HS there. That there seems to be a correlation between psoriasis and latex sensitivities. And I've brought this up a couple of times for folks who've been here before and heard me babble about it. It's kind of my new poster child. That people who interact with the medical community a lot, hence preemies, neurotube defects, and things like that, tend to spend more time, but it also can be hereditary. So if your mom or dad was a nurse or a doctor, you're more likely to get some inherited latex sensitivities. So what I frequently tell people is we only think about things like latex gloves, condoms, things like that, rubber boots. But there's so many foods that are high in latex and healthy, good for you foods like avocado. And for somebody who has dry, flaky skin, you would say, oh, eat more healthy fats. And that normally would be good. And so if somebody identifies as having a latex sensitivity, I hate to say, Google the foods that are high in latex, and for real, it's come up with a horrifying list, but you just take the top 10. And it's a lot of fruits and avocados. But look for other more obscure sensitivities. It is, everybody thinks about gluten or dairy, and those certainly can be as simple as that. Mangoes, yeah. But it can be corn. I'm sensitive to corn, and I hate it because I like all things corn. I grew up on popcorn. That was a family tradition to make popcorn between commercials. And it can be nightshades. And so those are your potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, green peppers. But you won't be sensitive to all of them the same. Some will be worse than others, and it may show up as arthritis pain. Ashwagandha is a nightshade. And sometimes it's something really weird that you'll never figure out. That's where it gets challenging. Like some people, it's egg whites versus egg yolks, or vice versa. So looking at doing a good food diary, seeing what aggravates, what doesn't aggravate, and making sure the gut is healthy. In both Chinese and Western herbal medicine, we say that what's expressed on the skin is coming from inside. And Susan, that goes back to your questions about the unique forms of acne. Those will oftentimes go back to what's going on in the gut. So I find psoriasis is a little bit harder to pinpoint. Eczema is usually pretty easy to fix, but easy for me to say, hard for all of us to say, stop eating your favorite food. And it is usually the food you consume the most and your favorite. And that goes back to the concept, and I know we can't do it in 20 minutes, but leaky gut permeability issues. And I'll put another warning out there. So folks who did a lot of antibiotics or steroids as a kid are more likely to have gut issues. We see it for anybody who drinks a lot of alcohol. It's an issue for folks who use NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, or Tylenol. So for women, like as teenagers who either had really painful menses and their mom's like, oh, just take Motrin, and they're like popping Motrin like it's going out of style, they're more likely to end up with gut issues. If you like, I took a Tylenol, I took a Motrin, once every 2 years, nobody cares, you're fine. But if you're on another round of antibiotics or steroids, if you're on a steroidal inhaler, childhood asthma, which oftentimes goes along with psoriasis, then it's very likely that you have some gut issues that need to be corrected, and that can take a really long time. That's a years-long process. And I will generically, I'm not going to say these are the things that help, but to heal the gut, I like the Smilax, plantain, not the banana, but the Plantago. Go to cola, calendula. That's all I can think of off the top of my head. There's 100 more that I can't think of, but those are good ones to start researching and trying to get away from those things like the inhalers so that you have other options. The other caution I'll put on there is EDS, and I won't try to spell that, but I will put the abbreviation up, EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And that's the hyperflexibility where you take your thumb or your elbow, like you can't see it. My elbow is 180. It's a straight line. Some people it's like, it's an extra 10 degrees. And there are different types of EDS, and it's frequently undiagnosed or it's subclinical. But when the connective tissue is stretchy, frequently the gut is stretchy and is more likely, especially given some inflammation or opportunity, it will start to have this, instead of being this very tight passage, you start to get a little bit of too big of particles of food that come through, and your body sees that as an invader and starts to create antibodies to mess with that. So psoriasis sucks. The steroids that you take for bad flare-ups are probably long-term aggravating the condition, and that sucks. Oh, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And it's so hard because they're like, what's an inflammatory food for me isn't necessarily an inflammatory food for you. And so it's so important that we identify those specific issues for you. And that's, I think I say this every session at this point, the idea of like, since probably the 60s, the herbs became really popular, but unfortunately herbalists didn't. And for folks who actually did some sort of, and by formal training, I don't mean went to Bob school, yay, do that, I'm the best. No, that can be lineage, that you learned at your grandmother's knee, that she taught you a generational heritage. That's formal training as far as I'm concerned. It worked for the 10,000 years getting up to this point, and it can still be there. Unfortunately, so much of that is oral traditions. And as we saw the European expansion, so many of those oral traditions were lost, and even in Europe itself, they survived for millennia as well. And the witches were considered the herbalists, and so a lot of that knowledge was lost. Wars have destroyed so many things. Even in India, which a long history, Ayurvedic medicine is great. A historical diagnostics, energetic diagnostic system, but the English went in there and basically destroyed Ayurvedic medicine, and so they're still finding ancient texts in lineage heritage that was smuggled away to the monasteries in Tibet that's coming back, that has to be translated still. China was pretty good at keeping everybody out. And so the Chinese really preserved it and had a written language, so things could be easier to pass on. The communists have obviously influenced that in the last 150 so years, but still we can still read those traditional texts. Okay, I can't, but somebody can, other than me. And so finding some kind of lineage and heritage that has a way to evaluate the nature of disease and the nature of herbs and evaluate the nature of foods, or you need to learn a medical system that, if I always say doctors, MDs are great at historic medicine, or excuse me, at heroic medicine. So like you get hit with a truck, you don't want an herbalist. You don't want me there. You want the ER doc that literally is a magician, what they can do to save your life and patch you back together. They are phenomenal at that. And their understanding of the human body, the mechanisms, all of that are far beyond what I know. And so if you're going to learn the medical way of approaching these things, a Google search is not sufficient not to understand it. I've seen a few people, I really like Paul Bergner. He doesn't pull a lot of punches. And he says, him and a few other people have posted, like, your Google search is not a scientific review, and the act of going through and analyzing things, not based on this aligns with my belief system, but actually looking at the research to see its validity, whether it's repeatable and so forth, is really important. It's funny, I got asked to help with American Herbal Pharmacopoeia with Roy Upton, who I think is just a great teacher, a smart dude, and doing great things for the herbal realm. They're doing a monograph, basically a huge review on kratom. And I'm not doing the medical stuff. I'm not doing the chemistry, because that's not I don't have a PhD in chemistry. I do have a medical degree, but not a standard medical degree. I have the crazy Chinese medical degree. And so I've been asked to do the more traditional energetic review. But in order to do this, I have to be able to not just go, this is what I think is true, and I went to some cool kratom distributor who said kratom's been used in this ways. I had to go and find some original research. So I'm having to go back to the 1800s to find journal articles written by anthropologists or ethnobotanists and things like that who had firsthand experience with the indigenous people there. It's taking me weeks and lots of innuendo, but then there's not a lot of resources that go back and do it. So everything now is biochemistry. I don't want biochemistry. I want to know how the indigenous people used it, and I need proof. And it's funny. I've taken it upon myself, because clearly I have too much time on my hand. There's a lot of things that are posted on the internet, guess what, that aren't true. And I don't understand people's desire to make shit up in order to confuse the masses. But when we see things that are written that align with our beliefs, it's very easy to go, yeah. And I'm so guilty of that, it's not even funny. But then if you stop and you go, yeah, I know I believe that to be true, but do I know it to be true? Let me go check out that resource. Let me go look at that. And when you go and you look at it, you're like, oh, that is bullshit. I had somebody who posted something that had nothing to do with herbal medicine, and they put this like, look here, this is the truth. They finally admitted to it. And I was like, yeah, I don't believe that. And so I went to a couple sources, and I went and looked up this person. And this person, who claimed to be the son of a multi-gazillionaire ruler of the Illuminati, blah, 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 had 40 friends. And they just made the profile like a month ago. And so it's like, that's not valid. And so there are literally, choose your conspiracy, but there's people just making up crap and putting it on the internet to include in the alternative health realm, in the herbal realm, in the supplement realm. And it's either, I don't know what the purpose is. Frequently it's to sell stuff. And so please, 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 as you explore alternative health for yourself and your education and so forth, I always say there's two criteria. I need 500 years of tradition or double-blind placebo-controlled studies that has been repeated from a different source. So when I see two universities come up with the same conclusion about something, but then you also need to make sure you know how to read research, that you know the difference between in vivo and in vitro, that you look to see whether it's an animal study. And guess what? Animal studies do not equate to humans all the time. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. How was it a plant matter or was it an isolated alkaloid? Because guess what? Isolated chemicals are very, very different. And we see that in the, I'm ranting about kratom as usual, right? When you eat the leaf of a coca plant, of a kratom plant, anything like that, it has a very specific effect. It's made up of thousands of chemicals. When I isolate the 7-hydroxymitragynine out of a kratom plant, or I pull out the cocaine alkaloid out of a coca plant, all of a sudden we get some very serious issues, and our deaths and so forth are coming from the addiction, and the death is primarily coming from people who are extracting a chemical for financial gain. Same is true of the coca plant. Like, last time I checked, cocaine and crack is not good for you, but the coca plant has millennia of history, safe long-term use. They sell it in the grocery stores. You make tea, you chew it. It's not a big deal. And so an isolated chemical does not a plant medicine create. So they are two completely different things with different outcomes, positive and negative. So really learn to read research, really learn enough medical stuff to evaluate things appropriately, and always look for, ideally 3 independent resources, and go back to the traditional understanding and combination, because when we look at those traditional cultures, the language is different. So I was actually just talking to Laura, who's I think like tomorrow, the next day, is back here in the U.S. Yay, Laura! She's been down in Ecuador. She just posted a picture about Amu Paquin, where that was the last episode I made, Sanción con Bob Linde, for Inti TV, and it was the last people there. They were traditional Quechua midwives that I got them to say energetic ideas, and the idea of bad air, I can't think of what air is in Spanish. Oh well. But they were the first people to, like, why do we make people sweat when they got a cold? Because they've been invaded by evil wind, is a Chinese concept. But it's in every traditional culture. But is that an antiviral? Is that a spiritual use? And it's so important that we understand it through the cultural construct. And so be that budding anthropologist when we evaluate that. Anybody who says the Native Americans used, then you got to go, which tribe? Because the reality is there is not a single cohort called North American Native people. There were 1,000 different tribes that all had different languages and traditions and plants and the use of plants. And we find that even, there was a study done, I believe it was in South America, and there was a tribe on one side of the river and a tribe on the other side of the river, and they had different languages, and they both used this one herb. And they used it for completely different, one used it primarily for spiritual uses, and one primarily used it for medicinal uses. And so, not to say that either one was right or wrong, but like, how do we understand the use of a plant in a culture that's not our own through the lens of that, and understanding that idea of, and every traditional culture has hot and cold, wet, dry, deficient, excess, tense, lax. And so understanding what does that look like in the living entity, the human or animal, and then how do we put those herbs together to match that person, and ideally even understand like why they're messed up. So often in student clinic, they're like, everything they eat is cold and phlegmy. And their chief complaints are cold and phlegmy. So all we got to do is get them to warm up their food, and we can do that by adding ginger to their food. We can say make oatmeal instead of blueberries. Blueberries are great, but they're really cold, and so maybe throw your blueberries in your oatmeal, and now we have it a little less phlegmy. Trying to find those foods that our modern society screws up our gut pretty bad. So looking for those things from a science standpoint can also be helpful. So the reality is, I will sum this all up quickly because our theme. Oh, tinnitus. I wish there was an easy answer for tinnitus. That is the thing that I've had the least success with. I got time to say that much. Acupuncture sometimes helps. You'll know in 3 sessions. There's only one herbal formula. There are a couple of herbs, and there's one specific Chinese herbal formula. It either works or it doesn't. You'll know within 2 weeks. And I rarely give it out because it can also cause diarrhea. There's so many different causes because it can be rock and roll, it can be things that go boom, it can be viral, it can be hypertensive, it can be medication oriented. So there's never a simple answer for the tinnitus. What I will say, it's worth a try because I understand it can be infuriating. I'm happy to say I don't have tinnitus despite lots of things that go boom. I will say we're probably going to see a absurd amount of it as we go forward because of things like earbuds, that everybody's cranking up the music super loud. It was bad enough. And I remember as a kid, it's like the second concert I ever went to, like 40-foot wall of speakers, and I'm like 10 feet back from it. I had horrible tinnitus for 3 days. I basically was shouting at everybody I couldn't hear. So I have a feeling that's going to get worse, that there's going to be a lot of ear damage from the overconsumption of awesome music. But I'll sum it up by saying parasites are something that do exist, that we can have a great role in it, but please don't exclude the Western diagnostic stuff to ascertain what it is so that we can eliminate it appropriately, both the critter and its eggs, that we make sure that we treat the whole family, critters included, as well as the bedding, critters included, potentially the carpeting. And don't assume everybody has parasites. And not all parasites are bad, because every one of the billions of bacteria that are in your gut are parasites that we have this wonderful, vital for our survival and our immune system and our vitamin D, a vital symbiotic relationship. So let's not kill every parasite that we see, and create a harmony in our body so that we can, especially, I think our next one, somewhere in December, whatever the last Friday is in December, I might talk a little bit more about how do we create some change going into the new year, those things that we can do to create healthy herbal habits, but some of that will be behavioral habits as well. And I'm a realist. We all have a hard time fitting in our New Year's resolutions and trying to do everything that's right. We all struggle with that. So unless you have a team of people working for you, it could be a challenge. So when it comes to parasites, we do the very best we can. And unless they're creating a significant impact on our life, and don't assume that they are, please find out what's the imbalance and correct that. And then we become very resilient to parasites. I should have all kinds of worms coming out of my butt for all the crap I eat off the ground. And I don't really have any signs of parasites. So it is possible to have a healthy digestive system. That's why we have stomach acid, to destroy a lot of those parasites. And that's why we invented fire. Okay, we didn't invent it. We learned to tame it usually. And that's why we should focus on our cooked foods, so that we destroy as many of those parasites as we can. So I hope you all have recovered from your food coma, and looking forward to the holidays that are coming up. Oh, I know what I didn't mention. On the 1st of January, I always do a free herb walk. You'll find it on the Facebook page. I forget the name of the park, but it's on between 4th and 6th Street. 4th and 7th Street on the south side, on 65th Avenue South. And so I always do an herb walk down on the south side. And basically, if you went out and drank too much, you won't be able to get up early enough to get out there. I forget what time. It's either 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. But I usually do a good 2-hour herb walk. I don't limit it, so it can be a lot of people. But people usually get bored about halfway through, so I usually get some newcomers that come out there. So I hope you can join me, that you don't overindulge in this time of overindulgence. And I always think of it as a nice way to start the new year and reward those people who did not overdo it. So check us out, schedule an appointment. We have gift certificates. I think we got discounts here. So Black Friday, whatever. I'm joining into the corporate bandwagon. I think our specials are going on. It's like 10% off a lot of stuff. Supplements for sure. Tomorrow as well. And get gift certificates, give the gift of education and good health to all your friends and families. Check us out on acuherbals.com, or just hopefully we'll see you in a class for Tradition School of Herbal Studies at traditionsherbschool.com. Bye. Have a good night, y'all. Boop.